Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing the 25.16 top lane tier list. So if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. This was a big patch. Finally, we have seen a decent amount of adjustments towards the game, which have actually, to an extent, shifted up the meta. Not particularly aggressively, although some things in Elite have gotten better, which I'll talk about momentarily. I'm going to, for this video, intentionally ignore the elephant in the room, which is Silas jungle. Crit Silas jungle. It'll probably get hotfix nerfed, and it's not really worth talking about in the top lane tier list, but if it is still not nerfed by the jungle tier list video, I'll cover it a bit more in depth, but be aware that is something which currently exists. Honestly, I wouldn't even queue up for solo queue at the moment, because if you come across it or you're playing with it, there's a chance that it is just going to be very egregious and kind of completely warp the game around it, and if you don't really enjoy that, then that might be something you want to avoid. If you want to know more, then check out Inspired's Twitter. He's posted a clip of getting a pentakill with it. It is absurd, and yeah. So the changes this patch, we saw a bunch of buffs and adjustments. So the main ones, which I want to talk about, are the likes of Rumble, who has gained a lot with his quality of life / restrict buff to his Q and like the tick rate of the ability, especially on red side. Singed also received relatively similar treatment. He also really benefited from that. Other things which got buffed are the likes of Gnar, Alawi, Varus received a buff towards his on-hit variation, which is more of a buff towards top lane Varus. We also saw some nerfs towards things like Warwick and Trundle. In the case of Trundle, it was mostly focused around his jungle presence, which had really been spiking quite aggressively in competitive. And then like Viego is another champion which I kind of want to talk about. Primarily, it's going to be more apparent in mid lane, but top lane Viego is seeing play, and I will cover that as well. So let's get into it. The detail, I'll rattle it off, is the same three champions it has been for quite a few patches now. Maokai's found himself in a pretty dire state for top lane, to the point where I've kind of considered taking him off the tier list. It's very clear that Riot just aren't really that focused on supporting him within this role. There are variations of builds you can kind of opt into, things like Phase Rush and like AP options like your Leandries and your Bloodletters, but it really just hasn't picked up, and the pick's in a bad spot. I'd recommend just completely avoiding this champion. There are just other picks which just outvalue it for the most part. Udyr is also in a pretty similar vein. He's not that supported for top lane, and honestly for the third champion as well. Smolder also not that supported in top lane, although I do think there are spots where you can kind of use him as a counter pick, whereas the other two I just think are just strictly not that great. Smolder into like your Casantes and some of your tanks can be viable in most spots, but outside of those spots really struggles as a champion in the top lane, so I don't really recommend him for that. Onto the C-tier event. So we lead off with Viego. He's not putting out particularly great numbers in top lane. That being said, obviously people are learning. It's basically the equivalent of learning a new champion for a lot of top laners. That alongside all the builds are kind of being like adjusted, and kind of what people are wanting to opt into. Things like Kraken, Borg, Trinity Force all seem like viable like first options. We've also seen kind of like some of the keystones being run, the likes of Grasp in top lane. PTA can be something you opt into. Conqueror can be something you opt into. So there will be some level of refinement, and I could definitely see him climbing the tier list, but right now I'd kind of recommend avoiding the champion unless you just want to sink a lot of time into him, or you are like or you don't really mind like waiting for other people to kind of get the or have the resources ready for you, or just like learn what builds are kind of like suitable for the champion. I'm gonna have him in the C tier. It's kind of temporary. He'll probably be shifted about depending on where he lands, but right now, yeah, sits in the C tier. Kazante, gonna leave him in the C tier. He's a relatively low agency tank, which is traditionally quite elite skewed. I recommend avoiding him for that matter. I do think, though, that there are aspects of the champion which can be really rewarding if you are very high mastery on him, but there are just other things I recommend over him, easier to access, and just have a bit more agency within the game. Jace is an incredibly hard champion to pilot. I basically recommend completely avoiding this pick if you are anywhere below the rank of master, and even like low to mid master. Jace is still a very, very hard champion to execute. I mean, like altogether he's a hard champion to execute, but like right at the top top levels, you tend to find people who are very good at spacing and utilizing the full extent of this champion's kit. Tom Kench, gonna leave him in the C tier. He's underpowered. He's just been struggling for a while now. He can have pop-off moments, especially if you get access to a lot of Hearthstone stacks and you can kind of get the ball rolling. But most of the time, people won't give you access to that, and the champion's definitely in one of its weaker states at the moment. Swain as a counter pick, I think is fine. I don't really recommend that highly. He's just like a tier above Smolder for the case of this. But the pick struggles just in the long lane. Like, he's very squishy, especially early on into the game, and most champions can stomp him quite heavily. There are some matchups, like your tank matchups, which can't really assail him, and he can kind of freely scale up, and into low damage compositions he can really like find his footing, but outside of those, he's just not really worth playing. No, I'm gonna leave him in the C tier for the moment. The champ's better, definitely, and using him as a counter pick is definitely a lot more effective, I think, in some of those matchups where they can't really like punish him, or they can't really accessibly get onto him, and they lose either in both Mega and in Mini, or just like really heavily in one of the forms. I think Nara can definitely be viable in those spots, but he's a hard champion to play. Understanding how to kind of like utilize both forms of the champion. He's also a lane harasser, whilst also being a champion which dives in and provides CC in fights. He's very elite skewed and very competitively skewed, and I don't really recommend him that much for average play, but if you enjoy the champion, he's definitely in a better spot, so I'm going to leave him as like the top end of the C tier at the moment. Dropping down is Gangplank and Yone. Yone's been in a pretty bad spot for a while. I probably could have dropped him down a couple patches ago, but as some things have been moving up in the tier list this patch, Yone is going to come down. And the GP is just a very hard champion to pilot. I don't really recommend him for any like average player, unless you're willing to sink a lot of time into him. If you are, then he's a great champion to master, but for the most part, for like a tier list like this, for like your mid elo, he's just not a very recommendable champion. Moving on to the B tier then, Silas. Well, I mean, same as like the previous patch where you're just using him as a counter pick. Obviously, there is a bug with his passive at the moment. You can use it. I don't believe you'll get banned for it, but it'll probably get hotfixed relatively soon, or he'll be disabled in ranked. I'm honestly surprised he didn't get adjusted or like fixed sooner, because they have put out a patch for both TFT and for League, so they could have done it in like I mean, TFT and League usually like patch hand in hand because they run on the same client, and yeah, Silas managed to get away with both, so he sits in the B tier as like a counter pick in his like AP state. But if you play Crit Silas, I'm pretty sure it's just absurdly overpowered, and he probably sits as like an S, maybe even like S plus champion. Wukong sits in the B tier. Actually, I say that. I don't know if Crit Silas actually works for non-jungle Silas. Like, I haven't actually, like, confirmed that, so he might not. It might just be a jungle pet bug. That might actually be something which, like, you could tell me in the comments. Like, I actually don't know if that's a specific thing, because all the clips I've seen are just Silas, like, in the jungle, like, one-shotting people. So, it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, Silas jungle is, like, massively overplayed at the moment, because, like, I mean, just everyone wants to play it. So, yeah, Silas. Anyway, moving on. Wukong, gonna leave him in the B tier. He's unpopular, but he can be fine as like a niche OTP counter pick. I think he's there as an option for you. I wouldn't really recommend him, but yeah, as like an OTP, sits in the B tier. I don't really recommend Tryndamere. His playstyle is incredibly degenerate, and I think he has pretty clear issues within his kit. But if you enjoy the playstyle, I think there are ways of making it work, but outside of OTPs, I just don't really recommend the champion in his current state. Yeah, so I think as a counter pick can be quite rewarding, but don't play him unless you've got a lot of mastery, because he is a very challenging pick to play and get value out of, and oftentimes you kind of like want the composition to be built quite nicely around you. I think Vayne as a counter pick can still be quite good as an option. I will honestly put Vayne and Varus back together with each other. Varus got buffed this patch, and he's the other like marksman, which can oftentimes function quite nicely in the top lane. Vayne into like tanks for the most part, and Varus honestly is pretty similar. Like, you want to play him into tanks, champions which have a hard time assailing him, and honestly his split damage profile gives him so much power against these matchups, and a lot of juggernauts also struggle into him because they just don't have the tools to really assail him. So yeah, both these champions I think can be really good in the right spots, but they can damage a team composition, so it is definitely something to be cognitive of. Camille's not been in the greatest of states for a while now. I mean, she's still a fine top laner, and I think if you're very comfortable on her, you can still play her, especially as like a counter pick. I still think Camille counter pick can be quite good, but she definitely struggles in lane against a lot of the meta options at the moment, like your Renekton's and your Jaxes can give her quite a hard time, and they are pretty popular in their current state. Gwen, I have sat in the B tier. She's obviously like number 1 top laner. I mean, number 2 top laner behind Rumble in competitive at the moment. She's very, very impressive there because of what she can provide as a champion. The damage combined with the self-sufficiency of the pick. Like, it's very hard to assail a Gwen. She can trade like throughout most of laning phase now because they gave her a lot more like dueling power, especially like early on to the game. She still scales really well. She still carves really nicely into the late game, but it's more reliant on snowballing up to it. You can't really as consistently just farm your way up because you want to stay ahead of the curve, but your curve is aggressive. Like, if you know how to play with this champion, I think she's an incredibly good pick, but she's challenging to play, and I think you have to understand how to use the W effectively. It's a very challenging part of her kit, and honestly, just watching VODs, there's lots of VODs accessible to you, and yeah, I think the pick can be a great option at the moment. And better I ever sat in the B tier. Similar, well, yeah, I mean, I'd say relatively similar reasons for Gwen. I think they are both incredibly elite skewed, and if you pilot them really well, they can be really rewarding picks. And honestly, I'd recommend learning them at some point because they're great picks to have within your arsenal, but they do struggle within this elo bracket. They are hard champions to pilot, and you will be punished unless you've got a lot of time and mastery in them because that is just the style of these champions. Nasus sits in the B tier. I just believe the pick's been slightly underwhelming for a while. I still think Nasus as a counter pick can be quite strong. Like, blind KOs, for example. Nasus can definitely thrive in those situations. But then you're also thinking it's blind KO, and most people just won't blind KO because KO traditionally comes out as like a counter pick to tanks and matchups which can't really punish her or push her out of lane. Gragas, I think he's in a fine state at the moment. Honestly, he probably sits towards the high end of the B tier. He's just a hard to execute champion, and understanding like what you're building within the game and how you want to build within the game is honestly a pretty like core part of the pick at the moment. Like, if you're playing the AP builds, we've seen some like lost chapters into rocket belts. We've seen some lost chapters into like more burst orientated builds with like your storm surges, your shadow flames, your Ludens companions. I think there's a lot of options on him at the moment, and you can just default on like a grasp, rower, like Winter build. I think that is something there for you, but it's about choosing what you want within the game, and I do think he's a high beta champion at the moment. Ornn I don't really recommend as much at the moment. He's got pretty clear issues in, well, number one, his mana. Like, Ornn has pretty big mana problems. And overall tank items are just in a bad state. Like, most tanks are reliant on their base kit values. And I think Ornn, over time, has definitely lost some of that. I think his mana costs, once again, are quite high. And it makes him not as he struggles a bit more pushing people out of lane, and a lot of OTPs on times at the moment on Ornn take mana flow scorch to try and like combat some of that, and that feels quite bad in some situations, but some people just perceive it as being necessary on the champion in its current state. Oftentimes you'd want to be running like Biscuit's Boots. That was like formerly what Ornn ran, or something like Presence of Mind, Presence of Mind Legend Haste was like has been something people opt into as well. But overall, I do just think the pick's in a bit of a weaker state at the moment. There's a lot of things which counter him within the meta, and he kind of sits as more like a mid to honestly low, maybe not low end, because I think the kit does have a lot of value in the right spots, and he is he's a tank at the end of the day, so you are going to get like the compositional benefit of the champion. So honestly, I'll have him as like a continuous mid B tier pick. Garen's just been underwhelming. The pick received a bunch of changes back along. They tried to push him more towards like a fighter pattern. They didn't really follow up that heavily on it. He's still going like crit items for the most part, but his crit builds are just less bursty, and that has left him in a state where he's not as viable in higher brackets of play, and honestly he's still a bit weaker than he was previously, even with like the Phantom Dancer buff more recently. Trundle, I'm dropping down to the C tier. Trundle took a big hit to his W this patch, and it sucks for top lane Trundle because top lane Trundle was in a, honestly, maybe like balanced, like even slightly weaker state, but was really not that great of an option anymore. Trundle's entire like kind of champion is stat sticking, and when he's lost genuine power in his stat sticking capability, it is meaningful, and he does find himself in the C tier now. Riven is in the B tier. The nerfs she received back along to her passive were meaningful. It hurts the Riven OTPs, and she's a pretty heavily OTP champion. I don't really recommend her unless you're an OTP. So put the time into her and you will be rewarded. But she's unique in the way she functions, and understanding how to use like the passive auto attack reset. It's very, very crucial on this champion to get value out of her. And yeah, if you're not comfortable on the pick, then I would just recommend looking towards other options. Darius has been in a, well, he got buffed more recently with the Q healing going up, and it did help him. But he's definitely in one of his more, Darius for like a while now has been a pretty elite skewed champion, and I just don't really recommend him that much for average elo brackets. He can feel quite oppressive to play against still, but is obviously something which is just going to come with Darius. But with his early game and honestly, like, execution threshold being in a bit higher of a state at the moment, I do not really recommend him. Like, I think he's in a pretty... I don't like the state he's kind of fallen into. I think they need to do some level of like smoothing him back out and maybe trying to remove some level of frustration, because yeah, the pick's probably not in the state that Riot maybe want him or intend to have him be in. Volibear sits within the beta. There are builds which I do think amplify him up to like an A2 option, but he's very feast or famine, and that can be a comfort of the champion. Like, if you're very, very comfortable with that playstyle where you just want to fight and you just want to sit ahead of the curve and kind of skirmish when you can, then he can be a great option for you. If you're not comfortable with that, I'd probably just recommend avoiding the champion. He's not in a mandatory to play like State at the moment. Like, I think he's good in the right spots, but if you're not comfortable with this very snowball and like if you fall behind kind of playstyle, you're really going to struggle. I would recommend just looking towards other options. Some of your mages include Aurora and Rise. Obviously, these are both pretty elite skewed picks. I would recommend some of the other AP options over them at the moment. But if you're very comfortable on them, they can be great options. And I think having one of these within your arsenal, it can be really effective at the moment. Malphite, I have him set on the beta. He's a good counter pick. Like, Malphite will always be a good counter pick option. And the fact that he is very easy to play does bump him up. But I think when you are opting into a tank with not as much agency as like a carry at the moment, as like a counter pick option, you are going to feel it. Like, you are not going to be as valuable as maybe you want to be, and you are more reliant on your team. And I think having some of that agency to yourself is really important at the moment. And honestly, being able to opt into like a Malignance on Malphite can be quite powerful at the moment. But it does leave you open to like other things. Like, I do think he's not I think there are good spots for him, but I think if you want to take something with a bit more agency, then that can be quite a powerful way to go at the moment. Alawi, I'm going to bump her up to the top of the B tier. She got buffed this patch, and it was a buff towards her tentacle damage. I believe it was another 5% total AD ratio on the tentacle sum. That's meaningful. That is straight up damage towards Alawi. That is going to affect her E. It's going to affect her Q. It's going to just generally affect a lot of what she does. And yeah, she's a better champion for it. I think if you're looking to use Alawi as a counter pick and just want to play her at the moment, I think she's in a considerably better spot. So I do have her at the high end of the B tier. I may even bump her up to the A tier next patch. Rumble, I'm going to actually, there's one more champion in the B tier, and that is Kled. I don't like Kled as much anymore as like a recommendation. I think he's lost some of his agency, and the fact that he is missing damage is meaningful. That being said, though, he's a good disrupt champion. His ultimate combined with his Q can change, well, not so much change the outcome of fights, but it can have some level of peel capability and kind of move people around in a fight. Do I think he's in a good state, though, at the moment? No, I think his kit's probably... he's got a lot more durability in his passive. Whether that's what Kled mains enjoy long term, it'll be interesting to see. I don't personally know if it's the correct way to go for Kled. I think he should be a bit more middle ground, where he can opt into a skirmishy playstyle, whilst also having the option to go a bit more juggernauty. But I think he's leaning definitely towards that juggernaut playstyle at the moment. And yeah, if you're comfortable with that, I think he can be a good option, especially with the passive buffs he received more recently. The A tier then. So the champions which I'm going to be moving up include the likes of Rumble, who got a huge buff. It was a quality of life / buff this patch, and he's really, really benefited from it, even in average play. Like, Rumble in Elite is probably the best champion in the game. Rumble in like mid elo is a good A tier pick. Now, he'll get nerfed next patch, no doubt about it. He will take over competitive on like red side as well now, and yeah, I think he sits in the A tier, but he's a very, very good option in his current state. Sion sits within the A tier now. The quality, the changes were mostly focused on making AD Sion better, but they better fit tank Sion, and I think if you are someone who like enjoys tank Sion. He's a great Stonewall champion. He's a great early game tank. There's a very clear reason why he's very good and competitive at the moment, and this is just going to continue him being good and competitive. I'm surprised they actually didn't do some level of like nerf for tank, buff for AD, but here he is. I think he's a good A tier option. Other picks which I'm going to be shifting around, actually, so Aurelia, I'm gonna leave her in the A tier. I still think this champion is incredibly egregious in what she can provide if you are comfortable on her. She has an immense amount of power early on to the game, but if you're not comfortable like with the playstyle and you're not comfortable playing the champion, avoid her. Don't play her. I really don't think she's in a good state to learn. I think the kit is really unhealthy for the game, and yeah, I hope Riot at some point like maybe change him around, unless that's what Riot are comfortable with and like what Aurelia mains want, because this pick probably is the most egregious 1/2 item champion in the game, and then she just falls off cliff. Like, she cannot keep up with the pace of the game, and she'll really struggle. And that, to an extent, is where some of the skill comes like from playing her in mid to low elo. Like, the games are going to go longer, so how do you make yourself more relevant within those games? And yeah, that is a challenge of the champion at the moment. Zac, niche tank pick in the A tier. I don't. Maybe he should be a B tier option. There are matchups which he can definitely struggle into at the moment, but I'd say the fact that he's niche actually plays to his strength. Most people won't understand how to play against the blobs, won't understand how to kind of like punish him out of lane, and I think you can get good value out of Zac at the moment. I don't really heavily recommend him because I think Zac would have to be an S tier champion to make him more recommendable as an option, but I think if you're just looking for a niche tank pick, then yeah, Zac can be a good A tier option there for you. Some of your other AP picks include the likes of Heimerdinger, Cassiopeia, Akali, Kennen. I think all these picks in the right spots can be really good. Obviously, some of your more niche options include like, yeah, Cassiopeia and Heimerdinger. Cassiopeia has fallen in a really unfortunate state where she's considerably less popular than where she was pre the changes, like a decent amount of patches ago. I think Akali is a really rewarding counter pick at the moment, and I think Kennen is a very heavily slept on champion. And obviously Heimerdinger as well. I think both Kennen and Heimerdinger are very slept on picks, which can be really oppressive in the right spots. Shen, good A tier pick. Having the capability to kind of like peel a hyper carry within your team can be really valuable. Obviously, you're giving away a decent amount of agency when you are playing this champion, but that can be really rewarding, especially if you understand that your carry, one of your carries, is going to do a decent amount within the game. You could also be a really effective counter pick, obviously stomping like the first couple of levels within the game. If you're running like Ignite and Titanic Hydra, it can give you good lethal thresholds, especially throughout like the first 15 minutes. After that, you can definitely struggle killing people, but that is where kind of the power of your utility comes in and playing around your hyper carry most of the time. Cho'Gath, I think he's a really rewarding counter pick tank. Obviously, I don't know if you've ever like watched any of my competitive games, but I will use Cho'Gath as a counterpick to Sion. When someone blinds Sion, I think Cho'Gath is a great option if you're not as comfortable playing something like the Gwen. Cho'Gath, I think he's a great tank, and if you know that there is a limited amount of anti-HP damage within the enemy team, then he can be a very powerful pick. And same goes for Mundo. I think if you can get a free scaling lane on Mundo, and an enemy team has a hard time cutting you down, he can be one of the best picks within the game. So I think these two picks, yeah, sit in the mid to high end of the A tier. They're not S tier options because I do think there are lanes which these champions can really struggle into, and they can be punished by certain team compositions, but generalistically, I think they are really rewarding as counterpick options at the moment. Teemo, I think he's a solid A tier pick. He's obviously more popular within mid to low elo, and he traditionally does quite well within mid elo, being a champion which can like bully people out of lane, has a decent amount of agency, can scale quite well. The shrooms can be really powerful control at points, and I think all these things make him a good, well-rounded champion, and there is skill expression in the pick. I would recommend watching someone like Rami Aura or Alan. I think both these players are really performant and just really good at piloting Teemo, and also great for informative content, especially Rami. I think he's a great player to watch. He's also British. Pantheon sits within the A tier. He's an interesting champion because I think there are spots where Pantheon can look really useless as a top laner, but there are really spots where he can be really oppressive as a pick, and I'd say he's a tier above Volibear in terms of like I mean, they both fall into the category of like kill or be killed. If you fall behind on these champions, they can really struggle. But if you're ahead of the card, they look really, really powerful and impressive. But I think he's a good option as like a point-and-click CC lane harasser, like lane bully champion with a global ultimate, and I think he's quite valuable in that aspect. So I do have him as like a mid to high-end 80 option, maybe not quite as high as some of these other picks here. Maybe more like a middle of the pack pick. Yorick performs really well in mid to low elo. He's not performing quite as well in higher MMR brackets, and he's definitely lost a decent chunk of his competitive presence, which is unfortunate to see because he was a really unique champion within that environment. I still think there are spots where he can be really oppressive, and a lot of champions still do really struggle against his schools, which is why I still rate him pretty highly. Like, I still rate him as like a mid to high end A tier pick, but he's definitely lost power over time, and you can't really blind him if you are unless you're like banning things like Aurelia, for example, because there are matchups within the game which he can still definitely struggle quite aggressively into. Aatrox, have him as a pretty solid A2 option. I think as a pick, he is a pretty well-rounded champion. You have options in the keystones you could choose, like your Conquerors, your Grasps, your Electrocutes. They're all there as options for you. You can also be a bit more flexible with your builds at the moment, opting into maybe some Juggernaut style builds, or maybe opting into some more Assassin kind of like bruisery builds. I think there's different ways you can go with this champion. I'd say he's a pretty good A tier pick at the moment. Poppy as a counter pick is a great champion. She has definitely had some of her power shifted towards her late game as of like some of the patches back along, like within this kind of like split/season. That being said, though, she can definitely be punished in certain lanes, and you have to use her as a counter pick. I think if she was more generalistic and broad as a champion, I think she would definitely sit as like an S2 option, but you have to use her as a counter pick. Otherwise, you will be punished by like a Vladimir, for example. Talking about Vladimir, I think he's a great A2 option at the moment. I really do recommend having him as like an AP pick within your arsenal. If you are looking for someone which can freely scale in a lot of tank lanes, and also he can fight back against a lot of the bruisers and skirmishers at the moment. When you're opting into things like Airy and Ignite, gives them a lot of trading power. Fiora, really, really powerful pick still. I don't really recommend this champion unless you're an OTP, but if you're an OTP, you're really like thriving with the pick at the moment. She's received a lot of quality of life changes over the last year, I want to say, and just general power has like been shifted into her kit, and she's benefited from some of the other things which have kind of happened around her. Even things like Petals, for example, benefit a champion like Fiora, who can sit on sides, skirmish quite aggressively, just like fight 1v2s or 2v2s. She can be really powerful in those aspects, and I think she can be really rewarding as a champion, so definitely sits towards behind the V8 tier pick. I'd really recommend learning if you want someone which you can maybe as like an OTP pick. Just having her as an like one of those champions in your arsenal can be really, really effective and like really scary for most people to lane against. Jax and Renekton wrap up the A tier picks, I believe. Actually, I'm missing Quinn. Quinn I still have as like a low A tier pick. She definitely lost genuine power from her Q nerf in the previous patch, but I still think she sits as like an A tier option because the egregiousness of her playstyle, where you can still just go static or Profane Hydra and then just roam around the map, is very, very clear. Jax and Renekton I would consider kind of like mandatory picks within your pool. These are the kind of champions you should learn, and they are very powerful in a lot of situations and can be quite blindable as well, so definitely rewarding to have these picks within your arsenal. They work quite nicely as jack of all trades champions, where you can do a lot of different things and play a lot of different archetypes with these picks. The S tier then. So Singed, I'm bumping up. He benefited massively from his quality of life / buff change this patch. I won't be surprised if it gets nerfed in the following patch, so definitely a pick which, if you're very comfortable on, should be playing. I mean, he's still going to be this OTP heavy pick, but the OTPs should be doing really well at the moment with the current state of the champion. Warwick received a slight tap down. He probably sits towards the low end of the S tier now. The intent of the change was to make him less oppressive and egregious with his healing early on to the game, and they've achieved that. He does scale better, not like insanely better. Like, he is still going to be a weaker champion for the early levels of the game, and that does outweigh traditionally like the power he has received through his late game, through having the on hit still being the same like later on in the game, but just like weaker earlier on. Olaf sits within the S tier still. The pick benefited from experimental hexpick being buffed this patch. I imagine you are going in most of your games now because the change was really big. Like, it was a really solid change, and I believe picks like Nocturne will continue to go it, and some other picks might start opting into it depending on whether they can utilize the stat line it gives. Your Juggernaut options are still your Sets and your Mordekaisers. I think Mordekaiser, even with the AD ratio buff this patch, is still a really good option. I say it like it's a bad thing. Like, people are going AD options, and I think there's varying levels of success. We'll probably at some point see like the clear banner, like the best items which you can go like opt into with those like AD builds. Things like the Sterix, the Overlord's Bloodmail, the Shojans, all are there floating around the space. Even things like Death's Dance, for example, can be something you opt into. Set obviously had the tap down on 0.5 armor a couple patches ago. He's still really good though. I still think he's a great mid elo AoE bruiser. He's still one of the, if not like the most popular top laner, and for very clear reasons. He's a very, very solid like pick, which like has the vulnerability of obviously being kited out, but opting into Stridebreaker can alleviate some of that pressure. Kayle, still over in the S tier. I still think she's an incredible scaling option and has been eating really well for like this entire season. The buffs to her towards the end of last season, combined with the petals and the wave changes and Atakan, have all been really, really solid for her. Like, she's really found her footing as a great S tier like counterpick option into like those tanks and into matchups which you know you won't get punished out aggressively in. I think she should just be a very good and clear pick to come out of your pool. And then Argot, I mean, I'm an Argot main. I recommend this champion every patch. I think he's a great pick to climb with. Very, very clear break points, very clear power curve throughout the game. You are weak going, I mean, you are usually quite weak, 3 to 8, and that is the clear weakness of the champion. Other than that, I'd say he's pretty good in the current state of the meta. You spike really nicely on Atakan, and as long as you're keeping in mind your power, like your points of power when you are playing, like, or when you are looking to trade, when you are looking to kind of like fight objectives, I think he's in a very good state at the moment, and I still recommend him as like the #1 top laner of the patch, even with other things kind of like floating it around up here. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.